generating a lot of attention. And I will expect you to listen carefully so that perhaps we can help each other. The Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs, cognizant of the rising unemployment among the youth, has signed off various bilateral labor agreements that has resulted in the employment of over 430 Kenyans abroad since 2023. We are being very careful here. Mark the dates, because we don't want a story going out there saying that they say they have employed 430 in 1 year. We are being very, very specific since 2023. So this is a cumulative figure. As well as access to thousands of digital jobs through the Ajira ecosystem. Kenyans abroad sent home 651.7 billion Kenya shillings in 2024, marking an 18% increase of 98.4 billion compared to 543.3 billion received in significant contribution to the economy. Come from at the Kenya School of Government. This figure has actually now hit $1 trillion. Kenyans in the diaspora have, as at November 2025, now hit the 1 trillion mark. That is a very, very significant amount of money, which is critical to helping keep our currency strong. In recent past, Kenya has engaged with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, ranked as the 3rd largest global labor market for foreign workers, employing over 200,000 Kenyans. We are seeking an additional workers, and this is pending approval from Saudi Arabia. Near similar engagement with the United Arab Emirates for mutual recognition of academic and professional qualifications is also ongoing. Kenya is also negotiating amendments to the 2012 bilateral labor agreement with the state of Qatar to streamline the recruitment following the recent recruitment of 3,000 Kenyans and an additional offering of 5,000 jobs, which includes 300 teachers, 300 nurses, and Qatar has definitely over 70,000 Kenyans working there. In the Kingdom of Jordan, there is potential for skilled employment opportunities, and negotiations are ongoing for a memorandum of understanding to open more job opportunities. Now, there is a challenge, and this is a challenge that we must speak to, and we will rely heavily on the support of the media so that we can deal with this menace. This is the issue of human trafficking. There's also a negative, and that's the one we need to address. Though significant progress has been made in diaspora diplomacy, we are also cognizant of weaknesses that put our citizens in harm's way by virtue of foreign agents. The government has had successful and safe repatriation of Kenyans from conflict affected, and high-risk regions. Notably, approximately 400 Kenyans have been lured by unscrupulous agents opportunities in the Far East, including in countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, and Myanmar, only to end up working in conditions akin to modern slavery. The human trafficking situation in Southeast Asia, particularly for Kenyans, is significant and alarming concern, largely driven by the rise of forced criminality in online scam compounds. It is a sophisticated menace where our citizens are often lured by fraudulent job advertisements, purportedly in places like Thailand, and are trafficked to Southeast Asia for exploitation, including forced labor, online scamming, illegal cryptocurrency trade, and even the horrific prospect of human organ harvesting. By 2022, the Kenya Embassy in Bangkok has rescued and facilitated the repatriation of approximately 500 Kenyan victims. As of now, 126 Kenyans are currently awaiting repatriation, 69 groups being held by militia. Some of you may have come across a media story which highlights the case of a Kenyan arrested at a Thai airport for using a fake immigration stamp. Having been previously by Moscow compound in 2025, he illegally re-entered Thailand to work for a Chinese-owned scam company in Myanmar. After a crackdown, he was arrested while attempting to fly home. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a shows that some of the victims are not innocent, but are part of the criminal network. A major concern is that rescued individuals now pose a national risk by potentially establishing scam operations in Kenya upon their return. Recommendations that we make focus on a nationwide awareness campaign, strengthening legal frameworks, and enhancing victim support and integration. The Kenya mission in Bangkok, Thailand, which is accredited to these countries, has been instrumental in providing timely advisories and labor-related information to forestall cases in which Kenyans are held in exploitative working conditions. The start of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine in 2022, recruitment exercises in Russia have reportedly expanded to include African nationals, including Kenyans. And I'm sure you have also seen that a number of other countries have suffered the same fate. They continue to receive inquiries from families regarding relatives allegedly involved in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Reports suggest that over 200 Kenyans may have joined this adventure or misadventure, with some of them. It is estimated that recruitment networks are still active in both Kenya and Russia, The Kenyan embassy in Moscow has reported injuries among nationals and others stranded after attempting recruitment into the war efforts. As September this year, a multi-agency security team raid was conducted in Athi River, where 21 Kenyans were found housed, awaiting processing to the war zone. One agent was arrested for coordinating of Kenyan recruits under the guise of overseas jobs. The agent is presently in court for luring unsuspecting Kenyans to fight in the war. Intelligence sources indicate that victims are reportedly signing contracts with unscrupulous agencies for visas, travel, and accommodation. It sounds very attractive. Scamming, illegal cryptocurrency, forced labor, slavery, harvesting of human organs, money laundering, wildlife products presents a serious threat to not only the national security of Kenya, but global security as well. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, human trafficking has become one of the world's largest criminal enterprises, generating over $50 billion annually in profits for traffickers. The saddest thing is that it is spiraling out of control as more victims are trafficked from Africa to as far as South America and Europe. The victims to the fake job adverts that are purported to be in the Asian continent. How do these criminal networks work? They have been placing online adverts on Facebook, Instagram, Signal, X, YouTube, among others, advertising various job opportunities ranging from receptionists, sales jobs, cryptocurrency traders, cooks, drivers, public relations officers, translators, factory workers, among other manual jobs. Once Kenyan applicants apply for the job, they are quickly interviewed and offered the job. The victims have been swindled to travel on tourist visas, procure one-way tickets, and book for non-existent hotel reservations. Since July 2022, reports indicate that many young Kenyans have fallen victim. And you can see the platforms they use, so they know who their targets are. The situation is whom waiting to be rescued. To mitigate this, the government further continues to encourage all Kenyans seeking employment opportunities abroad to do so through agencies that have been vetted by the Ministry of Diaspora. The National Employment Agency is tasked with regulating and accrediting recruitment agencies, as well as ensuring compliance with ethical recruitment standards, conducting pre-departure training, and safeguarding the welfare of workers and accountability in cases of abuse and repatriation. On the issue of repatriation, the government has to date rescued and repatriated over 500 victims since 2022. Further, the relevant agencies have investigated and delisted close to 600 rogue foreign and also local job agency recruiters, 600. This is not enough, as discussions are ongoing for a proposal to publicly list these agencies that exploit the vulnerability of our people, basically to name and shame. Recently, the ministry has also facilitated the successful repatriation of a Kenyan woman and her daughter from Qatar to Kenya after they found a stressful situation in the country. In the interest of privacy, we shall not disclose further than that. Equally, the ministry last month repatriated a toddler from Jakarta, Indonesia, whose Kenyan mother is facing a jail sentence, caught up in some illicit trade. She's facing a jail sentence. But the child, the toddler, arrived at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport and was handed over to his grandmother and aunt. In Saudi Arabia, given the huge population of Kenyans working in the country, the problem of mothers with undocumented children is prevalent, and the government is pursuing bilateral interventions. And this has been a subject of several parliamentary questions, by the way, from members of parliament whose constituents have been affected in one way or the other. The government of Kenya, through a drive dubbed Mobile Consular Services, has conducted DNA tests and collected 707 DNA samples. Upon verification of parenthood, following positive mother-child DNA matches, it has processed birth certificates to facilitate the immediate repatriation of the children and their mothers. Through the lobbying of the Kenya government, a joint interdepartmental working group formed in January 2025, comprising the Kenya Embassy, Saudi Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Labor and Interior, and the Saudi General Directorate of Passports, helped in the provision of emergency travel documents for both mother and child. Since its inception, the deliberate efforts have resulted in the safe repatriation of 59 mothers and 73 children back to Kenya. Now, let me move to regional diplomacy and the welfare of Kenyans abroad. Kenya enjoys favorable trade relations with its neighbors within the East African community, with the trade balance between Kenya and Tanzania, as well as with Uganda, being positive. A case in point, as at 2024, is that the value of Kenya exports to Uganda While for the Tanzania, as at 2024, the value of Kenya exports to Tanzania stood shillings at 57 billion Kenya shillings. The trend of trade with the East African community over the last 5 years indicates continued export growth and a growing trade surplus in favor of Kenya. In 2024, total exports to the East African community was estimated at 321.4 billion Kenya shillings, a 103% increase from 158.3 billion worth of exports recorded in 2020. During that period, the trade surplus has widened from 102.1 billion in 2020 to 217.6 billion in 2024, an increase of 113%. As appreciated above, Kenya and Uganda continue to enjoy cordial and steadfast relations. Uganda is Kenya's largest export destination, accounting for 11.3% of total exports in 2024. The two countries will hold the 14th session of the Joint Border Commission and the second Joint Technical Commission later this month in Kampala and Mbale. On the now resolved missing Kenyan activists in Uganda, I would like to inform the country that the ministry closely monitored the case of the two missing Kenyans, Mr. Bob Njagi and Mr. Nicholas Oyo, who disappeared on 1st October 2025. High-level diplomatic engagements between Kenya and Uganda eventually led to the release on Friday. They have since been reunited with their families. When I say high level, I mean really high level. President Ruto was engaging with his counterpart on this matter. Kenya-Tanzania relations. Following Tanzania's general election on 29th October 2025, tensions arose due to the perception of foreign interference by non-state actors from Kenya and other countries, presumably. Kenya recognizes President Samia Suluhu Hassan's administration and remains committed to cooperation under the Kenyan High Commission in Dar es Salaam continues to provide consular support, including visa amnesty requests and repatriation of affected citizens. I'd like to update Kenyans on the status of our citizens in Tanzania. The eight Kenyans arrested in different police stations across Tanzania have now been released. 3 Kenyans are still being held, 2 in Arusha and 1 in Dar es Salaam police stations. However, there are 2 unresolved cases. 1, a Kenyan by the name John Ogutu was shot dead on 29th October at 7 p.m. Goba Center, Ubungo District in Dar es Salaam. He was a teacher at Sky Schools High, Rabson. His body has not been traced to date. The list of those affected above are in a comprehensive statement which you will be able to see. The peace process in the DRC. Kenya has and will continue to play a constructive and impartial role and reiterates its full support for ongoing regional efforts to pacify Eastern DRC under the African Union mediators, as well as the ongoing international efforts in Doha and Washington. Kenya has consistently supported peace and stability in the Democratic Republic of Congo. notably through the Nairobi Peace Process, a comprehensive regional initiative launched under the auspices of the East African Community. More recently, President William Ruto, in his capacity as the chair of the EAC, has actively been involved in facilitating the joint EAC South African Development Community SADC initiative. Remember, it's now one merged process under the African Union. In Sudan remains dire, and the country risks being fragmented. Kenya calls on both sides of the divide to an immediate and unconditional ceasefire and a return to the negotiating table, because only dialogue can resolve the conflict. Kenya also supports regional efforts led by the Intergovernmental Authority of Development and the African Union, which recently appointed President Museveni as the mediator for the Sudan conflict, as well as international efforts by the Quad, comprising the United States and UAE, by Ramtane Lamara, the United Nations Secretary General's personal envoy to Sudan. Kenya will continue to stand ready to contribute in any way towards the realization of peace in Sudan. I decided to just emphasize that because people tend to forget that here in Nairobi, President Ruto had direct communication with both Burhan and Hemeti. He did not favor any side. But for some reason, there's always a deliberate effort to distort the facts. Kenya stands for one Sudan and a peaceful Sudan. The situation in South Sudan. Kenya remains seized of the situation in South Sudan and is exploring several options for jumpstarting talks in the country with a view to achieving a sustainable peace. IGAD, the African Union, and the United Nations have warned of potential collapse of the revitalized agreement for resolution of conflict in South Sudan. Agreement, if correct measures are taken. Implementation of this peace agreement remains slow, and political mistrust, security violations, and delayed unification of forces, dialogue mechanisms, including the Tumaini Initiative, remain frozen. The situation in Ethiopia. Kenya and Ethiopia continue to work together through enhanced cooperation and information sharing to address the anticipated cross-border threats in an effort to confront shared threats and maintain peace and stability in the region. On Somalia, Somalia continues to face persistent insecurity, Al-Shabaab's resilience, federal member state tensions, and limited physical support for the African Union Support and Stabilization Mission in Somalia, AWESOM. Emerging cooperation between Al-Shabaab and Yemen's Houthis continues a widening transnational threat along the Red Sea corridor. The political friction between Mogadishu, Puntland, and Jubaland also continues to undermine stabilization efforts ahead of elections. Kenya will continue to play an active mediation role, engaging national leaders, federal member states, and clan elders to bridge political divides, build trust, and address underlying grievances. Haiti. On the issue of Haiti, Kenya takes pride in the stability efforts in the country. Through the spirit of international solidarity, the Kenya-led mission of 800 Kenyan officers continues to make progress that has resulted in the reopening of schools, health facilities in areas controlled by the mission. This is progress for the Haitian people, and we will continue to lend support as the mission transforms into a gang suppression force, GCF, with a UN-led mandate. The support to Haiti is part of Kenya's contribution to international peace and security positions, and positions Kenya as an exporter of peace. Ladies and gentlemen, Kenya has been involved in over 43, almost 50 peacekeeping missions globally, whether in Africa, whether in parts of Europe and other areas, or in Asia. Kenya has been there. So the mission in Haiti was not an experiment. It's out of experience. And we now hope that as normality returns, we shall be able to assist or have contributed to the well-being of the people of Haiti. Other ongoing global engagements. As I said earlier, Kenya is taking part in the COP30 meeting, and this underscores our stature as the home of the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, and amplifies our historically strident voice on climate justice and climate resilience, funding especially for the Global South. This further augments the President's role as the current chairperson of the Committee of the African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, the Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs remains committed to strengthening Kenya's anchor status built on a remarkable history of robust working relationship with its neighbors, most notably the Republic of Uganda, the United Republic of Tanzania, the Republic of South Sudan, the Federal Republic of Somalia, the Democratic Republic of Congo. We also have Burundi, Rwanda, hinged on the tenets of shared progress that recognizes peace as a prerequisite to development. Kenya remains a trusted ally in regional and global affairs, as evident in our role as the champion of institutional reforms of the led by His Excellency the President. Ministry counts on will as we work towards the protection, promotion, and projection of our national interests as a great nation. I thank you most sincerely for your time and attention. God bless you. God bless Kenya. Now, I give the difficult part of responding to the questions. Both Dr. Singoe and Roslyn Jogo. Mine was the easier part. So if there are any questions, as I take a breather, my two colleagues will respond. Thank you. You just indicate your name, the media house, and then they'll take it.
Thank you very much, Excellency. Now, I think we allow the members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, to come here so that they can be captured by the microphone, because you're not able to move the mic there. So please,
My name is Abdi. I've talked significantly about Momjagi and Nicholas Oyo returning to the country, but you heard what the president of Uganda said. They were kept. What action will the ministry and the government of Kenya take against the authorities in Uganda, maybe probably taking them to the East African court? The other question is, what is the Foreign Affairs doing about the situation in Russia? You've just told us figures of Kenyans who are currently stranded in between Russia and Ukraine. And maybe tell us, Ukraine has also been recruiting. How many Kenyans have been recruited? And then finally, you've just said 2 unresolved cases in Tanzania. 1 has been confirmed dead. Maybe for the families who are watching you right now, does it end there for the person who were killed in Tanzania?
Well, thank you very much. Let's take those questions. The first question leads to the statement by His Excellency President Museveni. I think it's important just to point out that our compatriots, Oyo and Jagi, were apprehended by the military police of the Republic of Uganda. To the best of our knowledge, they have been returned, and they are certainly in good health. It is my belief that President Museveni was speaking metaphorically, rather than to suggest that there was therefore, until and unless we are able to get further information with respect to their at this point in time, I'm pleased that our competitors for them to return by virtue of the fact that they were being held by of the public on the basis of, and therefore it became challenging for us to be able to engage within the shortest time possible, but we did our best, and we are very happy that they're back with us. Victim to recruitment and who are serving somehow in the front lines. We've had engagements with Russian authorities at the diplomatic level. We have the full assurance of the Russian authorities that the Russian government, but that under their law, there is no prohibition against a non serve within the Russian military if they do so voluntarily. As a consequence, we are working closely with the Russian authorities in country and also out of Moscow to be able to ensure that no Kenyans are being involuntarily trafficked to serve in this military, in the Russian military, incompatibly with our laws and incompatibly with Russian law. With respect to Ukraine, it is our knowledge and our understanding that some Kenyans who are on the front lines serving as part of the Russian military were apprehended and are being held as prisoners of war by the Ukrainians. It's not that they were recruited by Ukraine, but they are being held as prisoners of war. We are negotiating with President Ruto, President Zelensky just last week, and part of their conversation actually touched precisely on this matter. Lastly, on the matter of the death of the unfortunate death of these Kenyans, of this Kenyan who was in Dar es Salaam, we are working on mission, also diplomatically from headquarters, to be able to establish the whereabouts of his body. We can assure the family at this point in time that we are putting our best foot forward, given I think the scope of the unrest that was witnessed in Dar es Salaam. and in other capitals or in other towns of Tanzania. It might take a while for us to be able to get to the bottom of this, but we want to assure the family, just like we assured the family of Oyo and the family of Njagi, and other families who have been caught in these unfortunate situations, that the government of the Republic of Kenya is doing what it can. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Honorable PS, for those comments, and thank you to Honorable PCS for the briefing. First, to appreciate the milestone of hitting 1 trillion Kenya shillings in diaspora remittances, which is, I think, something that we should all celebrate. And for me, it begs the question. My name is Boniface Mwali. I represent the East African Journalists for Arts and Culture as chair of the association. And my question is on the initiatives that the ministry is spearheading in the area of cultural diplomacy, especially leveraging on our diaspora communities who are, great ambassadors of Kenya in the places where they reside. We've not really had much on about the programs and the wins that we have had in that space, so maybe you could outline where we are on that. Second question is concerning the Saudi Arabia situation and the case there. There's been a massive media reports, headline I'm sure you're aware of today and yesterday in the New York Times about the situation in Saudi Arabia. Given that there has been a lot of engagement on this matter by the embassy in Saudi Arabia, and also from the reports that we have read, it implicates some of the officials, representatives within the foreign ministry. Yep. Yeah. How do you, as a ministry and as a department, reward or associate? The ambassador is set for demotion as well. How do we reconcile that with what is happening in that region? And finally, my last question is, if you could give us an overview of the upcoming France-Africa Summit, because I recently had opportunity to interview the French ambassador, and he spoke a lot about the expectations that the participants who will be attending that will be looking forward to. So maybe from your perspective, you can tell us, what is Kenya looking to achieve from that engagement?
Right, so I'll speak to the first. The diaspora are a big part of the work that we do in cultural diplomacy. Nobody else expresses cultural diplomacy or one's culture as much as the people who represent that culture. So within the work that we do with our diaspora, you will find that we have cultural days in our various missions, often around national holidays and Mashujaa Day and so on, around which then we are able to celebrate our food. A lot of them are diaspora association led, then supported by our teams on the ground that work within the Kenya missions abroad and teams from headquarters then who would ideally work with this. But it's important to know that even as the diaspora do these things where we express our culture and share who we are with the rest of the world where we live, we also have cultural diplomacy, a cultural diplomacy unit here at HQ that is well staffed and that works to support that important initiative. Cultural diplomacy remains a key element of our foreign policy, and so that is partly how we deal with that. You will find that Kenyans abroad are very involved in the arts and in culture, and I say this because it's something that you mentioned as one of your emphasis areas in your journalism, in the arts, in performing arts and so on. On the second piece on the Saudi Arabia undocumented children matter that you spoke about, it's important to stress 2 or 3 things. Firstly, that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is an extremely important destination for our diaspora workforce. You heard the Prime Cabinet Secretary say that we have well over 200,000 Kenyans living and working in Saudi Arabia, and those numbers rise every single day. To underscore that, of diaspora remittances, Saudi Arabia is the second largest remitter to Kenya. So the US is number one of our diaspora populations. The second one is Saudi Arabia. So it's important. I want to sort of give you the context within which this story is evolving. But to also note that Kenya recognizes and Kenya has and provides the opportunity for every single citizen to register the birth of their children. Right, so and then it is the obligation of every parent to ensure that that registration is done. Waziri spoke a little bit about what we have done to sort of mop up and to mitigate the situation of our children within available resources, but also extending beyond what we usually do, including the DNA sampling that I spoke about that has been done, but also the negotiation of a temporary waiver for mothers who are out of status and the repatriation that has actually already happened. What I would say is that the State Department of Diaspora Affairs and the State Department of Foreign Affairs, the ministry as a whole, is very committed to not have at the missions. This is something that we take very, very seriously. And we ask anybody who experiences service that is below par to actually let us know. And we do have our various contacts, and we would take that very seriously and deal with that. To be clear, and PS here is going to speak about Ambassador Ruwange has not been demoted. It is the nature of the Foreign Service that we will move our assets around, and the President has the right to move his ambassadors across the country, across the nation to serve the interests of this country. So his movement or his reallocation speaks nothing to the work that Ambassador Ruwange has done. Perhaps you want to.
Thank you very much. I would completely agree with P.S. Roslyn. Ambassador Ruwange is one of our better performing ambassadors. It is actually because of the importance that Kenya attaches to her relationship within East Africa that when we looked at the assets of our diplomats around, His Excellency the President decided that he would fit better in Arusha, where all these negotiations around implementing the ESC Common Market Framework, are happening and are germane to our economy. And so it was just really a reallocation rather than a demotion. Just to also speak to cultural diplomacy, yesterday UNESCO formally adopted Swahili as a language of UNESCO, marking a significant recognition of one of our cultural forms of expression, which is our language, namely Swahili. So working together with our colleagues again in East Africa, in Tanzania, and Uganda, we were able to push this through, and again through the African Union mechanism. On cultural diplomacy, what we are also doing is documenting those members in the diaspora who are making a cultural contribution to Kenya. And the idea is to recognize people like Anyona, the owner of Swahili Village in the US, a franchise of restaurants, basically delivering Kenyan cuisine to the US market, recognizing some of them and beginning to create a new honorary ambassadorship of cultural diplomats whom we can be able to confer with status and respect and recognition. And that is just part of what we are doing in that space as well. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Africa-France Summit is happening on the 11th and the 12th of May next year. It is a critical summit that brings together all the 54 African countries together with France to really recast afresh the relationship between France and Africa beyond the colonial construct. It's not just about being a francophone Africa that you have a relationship with France, but that France is looking at Africa as a horizon for investment and is looking at ways in which it can optimize its relationship. And so Kenya is playing host for the very first time. A non-Francophonie country is going to play host to that summit. We will hold a special briefing on the French-Africa Summit, and we'll be able to break down what we consider to be the critical imperatives of that conference and what we expect in terms of delivery. Thank you very much.
Hi.
Next.
I'm Joris Fioretti. I work for AFP here. Have you heard of family receiving money from Russia after their loved ones had died on the front line? Because it's supposedly in the contract they signed with the Russian army. Do you know any figure for Kenyans who died in Russia? Did the embassy in Moscow facilitate any repatriation of body to Kenya? You were mentioning, Minister Mudavadi, an operation in which 21 Kenyans were freed near Nairobi. In this operation, there was a Kenyan who was arrested as a facilitator, but there was also a Russian who was arrested. Yet, he was allowed to go back to Russia. Can you tell us if there was any intervention from Russia so that Mikhail Yapin was actually allowed to go home free and without being bothered for what he had done? And the last thing, you're about to sign, I mean, it was written in the statement last week, you would like to sign a diaspora agreement with Russia so that Kenyans can actually go work there. So you were mentioning the case of Kenyans who've been lured to the front line and Kenyans who've been lured to factories to assemble drones and other things. On which ground can you base this MOU, and how can you have faith in the Russian government when this is happening to a lot of citizens of yours in Russia? On Tanzania and Uganda, Mr. Museveni's comments were a metaphor, which is good to know, because he explained very precisely in his interview how and why Kenyan citizens were in his country, because they were paying Bobby Wine, etc., etc. NGOs and human rights NGOs are criticizing Kenya for not doing enough in the two neighboring countries as far as the two Kenyans who were arrested, but also with the hundreds, if not thousands, of dead in Tanzania in the last, electoral violence. The same NGOs are suggesting a collusion between Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. What do you think of that? Can you answer to that? And I understand the trade importance, the importance of trade, but how important can trade be if, in the end, human rights issues cannot be addressed? Maybe to the extent that Kenya is losing its soul?
First two questions, answer is no, which means that we haven't received any mortal remains of Kenyans. We have not had information with respect to funds transferred to families from beneficiaries. With respect to the oppression, answer is, just like the Prime Cabinet Secretary mentioned, there is an ongoing trial of the Kenyan who was complicit in this conduct. With respect to the Russian, who was arrested, he was deported so that he can stand trial in Russia. That is precisely the request of the Russian Federation, and we complied with that request because they are the best. They are in the best position in terms of being able, to deal with this issue. I'll let my sister speak to the issues around labor and the bilateral labor agreement with Russia, which I think is very, very important. But again, just to come back to East Africa, we attach immense importance to our relationship with our neighbors. We do not interfere with the political processes in these countries. The right to political participation is one of those rights that is germane in the province of citizens of those countries. Kenyans do not vote in Uganda. Kenyans do not vote in Tanzania. It is the role of the citizens of those countries. And so the participation in any part of the political ecosystem by a non-national is something that falls outside the remit of the right of anybody. If a non-national were to participate in our campaigns in Kenya, we would find fault with that. And so when some Kenyans have sought to insert themselves into the political processes of neighboring countries, that raises serious questions. We may have views, we may even have very strong views about the nature of their democratic practice. But ultimately, it is the duty of the citizens of those countries to be able to make a determination with respect to who is best placed to lead those countries. And so we would actually really wish to implore our brothers and sisters in Kenya that we are in a different context from a constitutional standpoint, from the domain of the extent to which our human rights are protected, from an institutional architecture standpoint, protections that you can enjoy in Kenya that might not be guaranteed in other contexts. And so it behooves us to be much more responsible, much more circumspect when we insert ourselves in the political processes of other countries. That would actually just be my comment on that matter. Thank you very much. But lastly, on the comment again by President Museveni, my response was with respect to his assertion that these gentlemen were placed on a freezer or something like that. That's what I was saying was a metaphor. As to the reason for their arrest, I think that is very, very clear. They were arrested because of being part and parcel of a political campaign of the opposition or on behalf of the opposition in Uganda, something that I think the Ugandans could have felt falls outside the domain of their rights. That's just what we can be able to say. Lastly, on the extent to which the Kenyan government has done its part to protect its citizens, I can say without any equivocation that the Kenyan government has time and time again stood in support of its citizens. It has protected them. We have evidence of what we have been able to do, the number of persons who've been repatriated, the number of persons who've been arrested, and our missions abroad have done so much to ensure their safe return to the country. And so we reject, we repudiate any assertion to the effect that there is any collusion between our governments in the region. If there is a collusion, that collusion relates to how we can upscale our trade, how we can optimize investments, and how we can create an enabling environment for both local and foreign investment to flow, not just to Kenya, not just to Uganda or Tanzania, but to all of us as a collective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, PS. To the question around a bilateral labor agreement with Russia, Kenya holds the idea that the rights of its diaspora workforce are best protected when there is a framework agreement between the sending country and the host country or the receiving country. Bilateral labor agreements are fairly standard, and they are one of the tools that Kenya is using to implement its global labor market strategy, and it's part of our diaspora policy in terms of the protection of our diaspora workforces. So indeed, we would pursue bilateral labor agreement with Russia in the same way that we pursue bilateral labor agreements with various other countries where we find Kenyans working. It's important to note that we don't always, as government, go ahead of private sector or of the market. Very often, Kenyans will arrive in a country first and begin to work there. And when we have challenges, at that point, often is when we'll step in with our protection. So we often will follow the market. It is a labor market, and it is a global labor market. So where Kenyans will go, then the government is going to extend its support and its facilitation, and the BLAs are just one of the tools that we use to protect Kenyans' rights in terms of our diaspora workforce. And we do that alongside other techniques and bureaucracies such as our missions abroad, such as the diaspora associations, support from Nairobi and so on.
All right. Can we do a final one?
What specific bilateral mechanisms has Kenya established to investigate, prosecute, and extradite Kenyan nationals operating trafficking networks that sexually exploit citizens from the EAC member states? I'm Gerald Combo from the FICO report.
Could you repeat your question, please?
What specific bilateral mechanisms has Kenya established to investigate, prosecute, and extradite Kenyan nationals operating trafficking networks that sexually exploit citizens from the EAC member states?
All right, so it's a very loaded question, and I'll give it my best shot in terms of my understanding of what you're asking. Is the question, what is Kenya doing to apprehend and deal with traffickers that are out of Kenya, that Kenyan citizens who are involved in trafficking? We do have an extensive legal framework that deals with trafficking in persons, and a multi-agency team that deals with trafficking in persons that cuts across various ministries. This Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs, Ministry of Interior, the various security agencies, the attorney generals, and so on. The entire infrastructure works together to deal with trafficking. We know that Kenya has sometimes been seen as a source country for trafficking, as a transit country, and as a destination country. And so trafficking in persons is something that we take very, very seriously and have put in place this infrastructure. But also within the EAC framework, there are conversations and convenings around the issues of security, including human trafficking, and matters that could also easily be addressed within both the diaspora policy, but what we are pushing within the EAC as an EAC-wide diaspora policy that then would work to protect our citizens who sometimes are targeted as a group for trafficking into Southeast Asia and so on. Do you want to add anything? No? Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Okay. All right.
My name is Mongi Maina from Inoro TV. My first question is in relation to the Haiti mission. We have a Kenyan police officer who has been missing since March, and the PCA said that that mission has been a successful one. But I believe to the family of Benedict Kabiru, they are not seeing that success. What is the status of that missing police officer? And my question number 2 is in relation to the British soldier who a judge here in Kenya ordered for his extradition. What is the status of the extradition process? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just take that. On the matter of our deployment in Haiti under the Multinational Security Mission, which is transitioning to the gang suppression force, it is true that that there has been some fatalities, and I think you're aware. We've lost 2 or so police officers, as well as our missing compatriot. There is always an assumption, of course, after certain duration passes, that this individual has passed. What we're struggling to get now is his mortal remains. As you know, we are dealing with a country that is unsafe. a country where the Haitian National Police is not in control fully of its security. And so, as such, it is an exercise in patience as we continue to work around ensuring that we can be able to get back the mortal remains of our compatriot. We want to assure the family that we will not rest. Our mission in Port-au-Prince is also working very, very closely with communities and with religious leaders to be able to implore the gangs who may, in one way or another, be holding his body to release it to the Haitian National Police and onward to the Kenyan deployment. And so, sir, we are doing what we can in that respect. On the issue of the extradition of the member of Batuk, who was involved or accused of rape and sexual molestation of our dear sister. As you know, by way of effort on the part of the government of Kenya, we have been able to push his extradition. The extradition proceedings opened last week in a UK court, and just like in our own jurisdiction, if we want to extradite our own national, they may challenge it in court. And so this particular soldier has challenged his extradition to Kenya before the UK courts, and that is a process that we have no control over, but our mission in London is engaging robustly. Through the Office of the Attorney General, we will have an observation of that trial to make sure that those extradition proceedings would come to an end sooner rather than later, so that that soldier can stand trial before Kenyan courts for the crimes that are alleged to have been committed by him. Thank you very much. Lastly.
My name is Luka Nami, Nation Media Group. One of the first questions, what is the progress of the Kenya-US bilateral negotiations after AGOA? And lastly, are safe in Tanzania? You heard the Ugandan president says he wants access to the Indian Ocean. Are you granting him that request?
So on our relationship with the United States, just again to emphasize that we have an excellent relationship with the United States that cuts across various facets, from peace and security, all the way to investment and trade. As a result of the lapse of the AGOA framework, we are now operating under a regime where our commodities are able to access the U.S. market on the basis of a 10% tariff. That is, of course, unsustainable from where we sit, and therefore our Ministry of Investment and Trade, working with a U.S. Trade Representative, are in the process of negotiating a bilateral trade agreement. Our hope is that that will be concluded as soon as possible to provide a coherent framework for our business people who are exporting to the U.S. market to be able to access that market, at least based on a much more reasonable concessionary rate. But it must also be said that even under the existing arrangement where 10% tariff is being levied, our commodities are still pretty competitive, given that other countries are being subjected to a way higher tariff level. And so the returns might be a little less, but when you look at it from a global standpoint, you do realize that our commodities are still accessing this market fairly, at fairly reasonable terms. However, we are putting our best foot forward to be able to negotiate a bilateral trade agreement. Again, on the matter of the safety of Kenyans in Tanzania, we are working very closely with our brothers and sisters in the United Republic of Tanzania to make sure that, number one, our investments are protected. There are many Kenyans who have invested in the United Republic of Tanzania. There are many companies, whether in the financial sector, in the insurance sector, in the agricultural sector, There are many Kenyans who've invested in that market to the benefit of both Tanzania and Kenya. Similarly, there are Tanzanian businesses operating in our market. And so it's in our mutual interest, sir, for these businesses to flourish, and for their safety, therefore, to be guaranteed. I think the government of Tanzania is as invested in the safety and security, not just of Tanzanians, but all who are residing and doing business in Tanzania, just like we are ourselves. So I really want to leave it there. I will not comment much on what His Excellency President Museveni said with respect to our oceans, but I believe very much that he does have a fairly great understanding with respect to the nature of our territory and the nature of our rights with respect to our natural resources, and his rights with respect to natural resources within Ugandan territory. And so I'd really like to leave it at that. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, you want to make the final? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, now you can see why I said they should do the hard work. First of all, let me just say that perhaps we should also start interacting with a different phrase, because I think it's useful, especially on this issue of labor mobility and what have you. I think it's in one of the European Union countries that they now refer to it as productive mobility, productive mobility, so that you are going there for a positive purpose, to contribute to their economy, contribute to your well-being, and contribute to your country's economy. So maybe that's the phrase we might want to start familiarizing ourselves with. Secondly, I just want to say to my friend, Kenya has not lost its soul. We have not lost our soul. That is why we are speaking to you the way we are speaking. That's why we are giving you information and data that ordinarily one would be scared of giving, and they would want to hide it, but we are speaking to you openly. I think that shows you that we have not lost our soul. As I leave this place, I'm going to talk to Upper Hill, to talk to our team there, the ones that operate a 24-hour emergency call center for Kenyans in distress. So these are Kenyans working all the time to pick up distress calls for Kenyans who are in different parts of the world. So that, again, is something that is good for you to be aware of. And finally, just on the issue of the corridor, we are also aware of international conventions on landlocked countries and what we must do to assist landlocked countries. So these are international conventions, and Kenya is a responsible member of the international community. So it is in our interests to facilitate any landlocked country that so wishes to use the port of Mombasa or the port of Lamu. We shall not deny any landlocked country that access. It's part of our international obligations. And in any case, what would be the value of a port if it does not generate business? What kind of economics would we be running as a government if we do not make our port competitive and a revenue generator? We have to also be conscious that there's the Mombasa port. We are competing with Dar es Salaam. So it is in our strategic interest to make sure that we can, through efficiency, through competitiveness, pull more cargo, more throughput through our ports. That is why we have the SGR. That's why we are talking about dueling the road from Mombasa all the way to Uganda. That's why we're beginning to talk about expanding and investing in the pipeline and so forth. and bringing in private capital to help us. By the way, that is one of the other things. Let me just digress a little bit into economics on this matter. I saw some of our colleagues saying, why do you want to privatize the pipeline? Let me tell you. When you see Safaricom, you must remember there was a monopoly called KPTC, Kenya Posts and Telecommunications, which was not giving any profit to this country. Through privatization, Safaricom was birthed. Today, Safaricom is the largest private enterprise in East and Central Africa. It's the largest taxpayer here. Safaricom has become the largest foreign direct investor in Ethiopia by extending its investment there for communication and mobility. So these are the values of privatization. Kenya Pipeline is making profit, but it is minuscule. It's so small if you compare it to the profit that is accruing from Safaricom. We want to ignite proper value out of it. I want the young Kenyans to remember that KCB used to be wholly government owned. Today the government has got just about 30%. 70% is owned by the private sector and the capital through the capital markets. Today KCB is stronger, bigger, and gives more profits to its shareholders and pays more tax. We can go on and on and on. So, what are the figures around pipeline? They are modest, maybe 5 billion or thereabout. But if we privatize, I can assure you, if we do it right, the resources that will grow for the Kenyan people will be bigger. Finally, when you say you don't want privatization and you don't want the government of Kenya to look for alternative ways, a government normally has two sources of funding, through taxation or through debt. That means borrowing. The Kenyan young people spoke and they said they want us to moderate taxation. So in the absence of taxation, we must find alternative sources of funding. And that is how privatization comes in. And I've given you two good examples of privatization in Kenya that has worked. Would many of you know that even Serena, which is a private group, was at one time largely owned by the government of Kenya? But Serena is a private entity, privatized. Has Serena been lifted out of where it is today? It's still here. Has KCB been uprooted and taken to another country? No, it's still here. Safaricom is here, the largest taxpayer. So that comes in the context of economic diplomacy and for us to understand that we have to open our eyes. Please, you people, as somebody said, keeping people in the freezer, let us now also help in not keeping Kenyans in an economic freezer. Let us help them to see that there are other things happening globally. And we are not going to have anything for our young children, our young youth, unless we give them opportunities both here and externally. We cannot do the same things, same time, every day, the same thing, all the time, the same thing. No way. We have to grow the private sector. That is where there's new capital. That is where there's fresh capital. Because we cannot continue taxing in the normal way. So tafadhali, ndugu na dada, help us pull so many minds out of the freezer. Please, asanteni sana. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tumemaliza, and thank you for coming, and till next time. We'll see you. Thank you.